Good YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, I see a lot of people now responding to comments made by undefeated 3-division world champion, who is a former junior welterweight undisputed world champion and currently the WBO welterweight world champion, and widely considered by many to be number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world in Terence Crawford, and his rival. But they have respect for one another in undefeated unified WBC IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer, who was widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, in Errol the True Spence Jr. With that said, Terence Crawford recently did an interview on Bart and Hahn. It's a New York radio station, ESPN. Bart Scott, former Baltimore Raven and former New York Jets football player, and he has a show with Hahn, okay? And Terence Crawford was featured on the show. Obviously, his ties to ESPN. Terence Crawford is a top-ranked ESPN fighter with legendary promoter, top-ranked CEO and promoter Bob Arum. And he did an interview, and he gave nothing but props and love and respect to Errol Spence Jr. With that, we always have to nitpick the interviews. That's the reason why a lot of fighters don't like to do interviews with media, but it's the way of the world. They need to understand that you have to use the media to your advantage, not try to dismiss them, use them. But with that said, he gave Errol Spence nothing but love and credit. And then he said something that obviously stuck out to many people, and there's a debate going on. The fact that Terence Crawford, he stated, Errol Spence is definitely a huge brand, a big name, superstar in the sport of boxing. He stated that he was asked about, do you think, because obviously, again, Bart Scott, is not a boxing guy. He's a fan of the sport of boxing, but he's not a boxing guy. He's not a historian in the sport of boxing. He's not a boxing pundit. He's a casual boxing fan. But he's a football guy. And he understands in the relationship between Errol Spence and legendary owner of what many people call the America's team, between the Dallas Cowboys, that being Jerry Jones. And Errol Spence, originally born in New York, but resides and represents Dallas, Texas. So what Bart Scott did was, he said, is it the relationship between Jerry Jones? Because that's what he knows. You understand? Bart Scott doesn't know what actually the logistics in the sport of boxing. You understand? He knows the commercial part about the sport of boxing. So he knows, he sees Errol Spence with Jerry Jones. And so that's what he asks. It's football related, right? Dallas Cowboys football, Bart Scott. So he asks about, is it because of the relationship with Jerry Jones that Errol Spence is a bigger brand and bigger name than you are? And Terence Crawford, he responded, no, it's more so about the promoters. It's the promoters want to keep everything 100% in-house. And when you have a guy as big a stature as Errol Spence and myself, and the promoters, essentially, he all but said they want to be greedy, but he didn't say it. They want to keep everything in-house. And so, with them wanting to keep everything in-house, they much rather you fight a guy under their stable than a guy where they have to share the revenue, okay? Especially two major commodities like Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. So he says it didn't have anything to do with Jerry Jones. What Bart Scott didn't understand is they were just using Jerry Jones for the arena, and Jerry Jones obviously being from Texas, and the Cowboys, he's gonna always, he gives a lot of love and respect to Errol Spence Jr. And so the fight took place at Cowboy Stadium. So Terence Crawford, he stated that it was more so 4-division world champion Mexican superstar boxer Mikey Garcia, who's a surefire future Hall of Famer. It was the fact that Mikey Garcia has a huge fan base in Texas, thus the reason why the fight did 350,000 pay-per-view buys. which I completely disagree with. And I can prove that. That's not the truth, okay? But Terence Crawford then goes on to say, if I fought the level and the names that he fought, level opponents and the names that he fought, I would be a bigger superstar as well. And Bart Scott agreed. But with Bart Scott, see, these types of interviews are safe havens for boxers. Because, you see, he understands that being Terence Crawford. He understands that Bart Scott does not know the logistics of boxing. He does not know the everyday conversation in boxing and the things that, the subjects that take place. He doesn't know anything about that, Bart Scott. And so Bart Scott agreed. He said, yeah, I agree with you. I agree, but I have to disagree. And here's the problem. That's nobody's fault but Terence Crawford's own. And see, so Bart Scott didn't understand and is not privy to the information to say, well, you chose to be in that position that Errol Spence is in. You chose not to be in that position because you chose to stay in your comfort zone. So I stated that I could prove that Mikey Garcia wasn't the reason why Errol Spence did these enormous numbers. And how I can prove that. He did 350,000 pay-per-view buys with Mikey Garcia. Yes, the most he's done. So he then fought two-time welterweight world champion, superstar boxer, Showtime Sean Porter. He's a superstar within the sport of boxing. Not many people outside the sport of boxing. I love Sean Porter. I love his personality. I love him as a person. He's a great guy, and he's a great boxer. But truth be told, is Sean Porter is not a major name outside of the sport of boxing. He's a superstar in the sport of boxing. He is not a global superstar. He's not in the casual boxing fans' homes. If there's not a boxing event going on, and you're not a huge fan of the sport of boxing, the truth is you don't know who Sean Porter is. Okay? You have very few crossover boxers that are mainstream media or go mainstream or go into casual boxing fan home. You have Muhammad Ali's, the Floyd Mayweather's, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard. You have, today's time who are teetering on that, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury. These guys, heavyweights are always that guys. Mike Tyson, for sure. Vander Holyfield. You have those guys that are recognizable foes wherever they go. But then you have boxers that are just superstars within the sport of boxing. Terence Crawford is the superstar within the sport of boxing. Sean Porter is a superstar within the sport of boxing. He's not a superstar outside of the sport. Now, with that said, my reasoning for saying this is that you look at Sean Porter and Errol Spence fought. Sean Porter's never fought on pay-per-view. Sean Porter's never sold out arenas. Sean Porter has never, been a major star in the sport in outside of the sport of boxing. His brand is not major, overly big. Okay? Errol Spence even stated leading up into their fight, Sean Porter can't sell out a family barbecue. Right? Not a big draw. Errol Spence fought Sean Porter in LA, not in Dallas. Not in Dallas, not in Texas, not in New York. He's born and raised in New York, has a huge fan base in New York. He was born in New York. He has raised in Texas, Dallas, Texas, has a huge, enormous fan base in Texas. But he fought Sean Porter in LA, Los Angeles. I was personally there at the Staples Center. And it's sold out. And it did 325,000 pay-per-views. It was sold out. Sean Porter's not from LA. Sean Porter's not Mexican. There's a huge Mexican fan base in LA. Sean Porter's not Mexican, and he's not from LA. You had two black fighters fighting as the main event. And Sean Porter's from Ohio. Errol Spencer's not from LA. Errol Spencer's not Mexican. It did 325,000 pay-per-view buys with a guy who is relatively unknown outside of the sport of boxing. He did 350,000 pay-per-views with Mikey Garcia. So that means Mikey Garcia's star power, star status, only accounted for 25,000 more pay-per-view buys than Sean Porter. So that means Errol Spence accounted for 325,000 pay-per-view buys, and Mikey Garcia only accounted for 25,000. Because even without Mikey Garcia, he still did 325,000. With a guy who's not as known as Sean Porter. If Mikey Garcia fought in LA, he would bring in a huge crowd because there's a huge Mexican fan base, just like there is in Texas. Okay, now fast forward. Then he fights Danny Garcia, 14-month layoff during the pandemic, not being able to sell out and put as many fans as they want in arenas. And he does 315 to 320,000 pay-per-views. Once again, he's consistent. He's over 320,000 pay-per-views consistently with or without Mikey Garcia. So that means that he accounts for at least 320,000 pay-per-views alone. Because Danny Garcia fan base is a Puerto Rican fan base in the Philadelphia, New York area, East Coast area. Danny Garcia doesn't have a huge fan base outside of New York and Philadelphia. Yes, he's a superstar in the sport of boxing, and he's somewhat known outside the sport of boxing. 315 to 320,000 pay-per-views. So Errol Spence is consistent regardless of who he fights. So I have to disagree with Terence Crawford when he says that was due to the fact of Mikey Garcia's fan base. That's incorrect. Okay? Proof is in the pudding. That's facts. So now he says, I would be as huge of a star as he was if I fought those level of opponents. The Danny Garcias, Mikey Garcias, Sean Porters. Well, now here we have to get into the meat and potatoes of what he said. And what Bart Scott didn't know, to ask him to come back, to counter. So he says, if I had those guys, I would be a bigger name. Well, why didn't you have those guys, is the question. And the reason you didn't have those names is because of your promoter, legendary promoter Bob Arum, who's going to be Bob Arum. I don't blame Bob Arum for being Bob Arum. Errol Spence, after he got the fight with Manny Pacquiao, he's going on the verge of fight Manny Pacquiao August 21st, Las Vegas, Nevada, T-Mobile Arena, legendary 8-division world champion, iconic Filipino superstar boxer. Surefire Hall of Famer. He's already a Hall of Famer. Well, guess what? Bob Arum, I don't blame Bob Arum. Errol Spence, he said, hashtag blame Bob, because he knows Terence Crawford for 5 years was trying to secure a fight with Bob Arum. With Manny Pacquiao, and was unable to. Not because Terence Crawford didn't want to fight him. Terence Crawford, 37 wins, no losses, no draws. 27 big wins by way of knockout. 33 years of age, stands at 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. Terence Crawford will be 34 years of age next month. And hasn't had a legacy high-profile fight as of yet. And he's an undisputed champion. It just came against a guy in Julius Indongo in an undisputed match wasn't a superstar or a star in the sport of boxing. Okay? So with that said, Errol Spence, he said, hashtag blame Bob. I don't blame Bob. Because Bob has been doing the same thing for over 40 years as a promoter. I blame the fighters that signed with Bob Arum, not Bob Arum. I don't blame Bob Arum for being Bob Arum. We all know who Bob Arum is, just as well as they all know who Bob Arum is, and you continue to re-sign with Bob Arum. So I don't hashtag blame Bob. I hashtag blame the fighters. So you can't blame a tiger for being a tiger. You can't blame a shark for being a shark. You can't blame, a snake for being a snake. You can't blame them for being who they are. You can only blame yourself for being in their habitat. And what happens. You knew what you was up against when you went in their habitat. And you did it anyway. Don't blame them. So, Bob Arum, he stated on numerous occasions that he prevented Terence Crawford from getting a Manny Pacquiao fight. For one, because he knew how to fight would end Manny Pacquiao in advanced age in his career, and Terence Crawford being the prime in his career. He didn't want to see it end badly for Manny Pacquiao being a close friend of his. And then Bob Arum, he stated, who's going to pay the purse? I don't believe that Terence Crawford, essentially, is what he said. No, not even essentially. It's what he said is a big draw. It's a major draw. He don't believe he could get a return on his investment for such a big fight for Terence Crawford that he wants to put up that money to lose the money. He said this on numerous occasions. So Terence Crawford is privy to that information just like we all are. Bob Arum, he went on and did an interview and he stated that I lost so much money on Terence Crawford I could build a mansion in Beverly Hills from scratch. That's what Bob Arum stated. Yet Terence Crawford re-signed. Yet right now, it's still undetermined what Terence Crawford's next move is going to be after his next fight. It was stated that Terence Crawford had his contract was set to be up in October. He's going to be a free agent. Well, that proved not to be true. He owes Top Rank and Bob Arum one more fight. And it's still unknown if Terence Crawford is going to re-sign with Top Rank or is going to exit stage life. This shouldn't even be a question what Terence Crawford's next move is. If Terence Crawford could come out, he can do an interview with Hall of Fame legend, iconic, retired Olympic gold medalist who's undefeated in Andre S.O.G. Ward on the special called Relentless. Go watch it. And he admits that he hasn't had that high-profile fight. He hasn't had that lucrative fight in his career. He's seeking it out. His number one objective is to get Manny Pacquiao. And you hear your promoter say he prevented you from getting the fight. That's like an entertainer. That's like me being a manager. Imagine this. Imagine your agent in the movie industry. Let's remove it from boxing. In the movie industry, imagine Denzel Washington's agent telling him, "Oh, I didn't get you to train today. I didn't get you, the Equalizer parts. I didn't put you up for audition for those parts because I didn't think you was worth it." Would he still be? Would that man still be, or would that male or female, would that woman or man still be Denzel Washington's agent? Imagine this. Imagine LeBron James' agents telling him, "Oh yeah, we had an opportunity to bring the Space Jam 2 movie to life, but we decided, nah, it's not worth it." Would he still be LeBron James' agent? Imagine your agent, Patrick Mahomes' agent, saying, "Yeah, we could have got you a new deal with the Kansas City Chiefs for $250 million or $400 or $500 million, however much it was. But we chose not to because we just decided we're going to test the waters. We didn't think it was worth, going through all of that. We don't know how you're going to react. And if you're going to ever, would they still be the agent?" Terence Crawford re-signed with Top Rank twice. And Terence Crawford has told the world that Bob Arum and Top Rank has told him after his Victor Postal fight or prior to it that there was no money for him in pay-per-view market. That was years ago. There was no money for Terence Crawford in pay-per-view. He told us this. Around the time he fought Victor Postal, Terence Crawford said that Top Rank and ESPN informed him there was no money for pay-per-view for him. And so that they weren't going to put him on pay-per-view. So in return, Terence Crawford has been on pay-per-view twice. The Victor Postal fight, okay, and the Amir Khan fight. It did 50,000 to 60,000 pay-per-views with Victor Postal and 150,000 with Amir Khan. And Terence Crawford, he stated, now let's just look at this, okay? He fought Victor Postal in 2016. That is over 5 years ago. And he stated that they told him then that they didn't have no money for pay-per-view to invest in his services. And he resigned. We had Keith Thurman come out and say, "Give me $10 million and I'll fight Terence Crawford." He had his manager and trainer, Bomac, laugh at Keith Thurman, Brian McIntyre, laugh at Keith Thurman saying Keith Thurman is pricing himself out. Instead of negotiating to get Keith Thurman to a number, they never even addressed Keith Thurman, never negotiated with Keith Thurman. But yet Terence Crawford should be looking, how did you pay Amir Khan, who was far past his prime, had already been knocked out multiple times, was Mr. Irrelevant, to say the least. and they paid him $7 million. And Bob Arum says the reason that Amir Khan got $7 million for the fight with Terence Crawford was because he was a good businessman, and you get what you negotiate. So they negotiated and gave Amir Khan $7 million. They chose never to negotiate with Keith Thurman. Your trainer and manager, Brian McIntyre, Bomac, he said that Keith Thurman, if he really wanted to fight, he would send Terence Crawford a contract. Terence Crawford is the A-side. Why would he send Terence Crawford a contract? Terence Crawford offers up the fight, not the challenger. He would send over a contract with a boatload of money to make the fight happen if he truly wanted it, but he can't because he don't have a manager. But yet, Keith Thurman, he doesn't have a promoter. But yet, Keith Thurman is getting the big fights and the big money. Terence Crawford, who has a promoter, is not getting the big fights and the big money. And his promoter is telling the world that he prevented him from getting the big fights and the big money. And yet, Bomac saying that Keith Thurman can't put up the money because he don't have a promoter. So you chose not to even negotiate with Keith Thurman or to attempt to engage in a conversation to see if what number we could get him down to stage the fight. Keith Thurman, former unified welterweight world champion superstar boxer who only has one loss to Manny Pacquiao. He got the fight with Manny Pacquiao. You didn't. Keith Thurman fought Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. The same guys that you saying if Errol Spence, if you had the same level of opponents and named fighters Errol Spence had, you'd be a superstar. Well, guess what? Keith Thurman also got those names as well. He beat Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. He lost to Manny Pacquiao. So he got those same fights. Now let's fast forward to Sean Porter. The WBO had to order the fight because Bob Arum says that Sean Porter wasn't worth more than $1 to $2 million. He wasn't going to put it up. Sean Porter, again, did 325,000 pay-per-view buys with Errol Spence. That's more than Terence Crawford's Victor Postol Amir Khan fight, combined for 210,000 pay-per-views. He's been in that fight. Sean Porter has fought Danny Garcia, arguably the best resume in boxing, win, lose, or draw. Sean Porter has fought Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, Errol Spence, Andre Berto, Adrian Broner, Devin Alexander when he was still Devin Alexander, Paulie Malignaggi when he was a champion. These are the people that Sean Porter has fought. Terence Crawford has yet to fight them. He's fought on pay-per-view. And Bob Arum said he's not worth more than $2 million. Then Bob Arum said if Keith Thurman and Terence Crawford wanted to get another promoter to promote their fight, he would make sure he get a ticket ringside, be ringside to watch them lose money. Then let's fast forward to Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia was offered $3 million to fight Terence Crawford. Danny Garcia said, I make more than that fighting low-level opposition. And Danny Garcia said, you paid Amir Khan. You're willing to pay Amir Khan $7 million, but I knocked out Amir Khan. I beat Amir Khan. You're willing to pay Amir Khan more money than you're paying me, and I beat Amir Khan. I knocked him out in his prime. In his absolute prime. I'm worth more money than that. They never went back to the negotiation table, never offered him anything else because Bob Arum didn't deem it worthy to go back to the negotiation table. So these are the reasonings, and Terence Crawford re-signed with Bob Arum and Top Rank. Terence Crawford even actually came out and defended Bob Arum, said that I know it's not Bob Arum's fault because I know Bob Arum wants to make the big fights. But yet Bob Arum was on record publicly saying that he prevented the Manny Pacquiao fight. Your fight, that's your number one objective. Your number one objective is to fight Manny Pacquiao, and he's on record multiple times saying he prevented the fight. Most recently, Bob Arum stated that they were seeking out an investment group from Abu Dhabi to place for Terence Crawford to fight Manny Pacquiao June 5th of this year, and the investment group in Abu Dhabi pulled out, so there was no investment group. So he said we still could have made the fight. Manny Pacquiao was more than willing to make the fight for June 5th, but we decided it wasn't worth us putting up the money and the guaranteed purses for this fight. So who prevented this fight from happening? Manny Pacquiao? Who prevented that fight from happening? That's right. You know who prevented that fight from happening? Not Bob Arum. Not Manny Pacquiao. Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford prevented these fights from happening. He chose to place himself in a position in the box, knowing there was no ladder, knowing nobody was going to throw a rope, and he continued to climb back into that box, knowing the outcome. No, Errol Spence brand is big because Errol Spence made better business decisions outside the ring. Plain and simple. Errol Spence got those big fights not because his promoter divvied him up and, offered him on a silver platter. No, because Errol Spence made sure he put himself in position where those fights would be available to him. Terence Crawford made sure he put himself in a position where those fights will not be available to him. That's the reason why his name and his brand is not as big as it is. Not because the promoters just favored Errol Spence or not because, the situation. No. Sean Porter fought Errol Spence and all these guys, Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia fought Errol Spence, Keith Thurman, and Sean Porter. They fighting each other. You had an opportunity to put yourself in the same position they in, and you opted not to. So that's on you. That's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.
Garcia, you're watching Blue Blood Sports TV. Wow.